All right, hi everyone. David Parsons here, lawyers in the attic, checking in with Ron Bamieh this week. We've been talking about his case. It's a murder trial. Jacob Caliboso is the name of the client. It's a trial in which the client took a lot of Xanax pills and got in a car accident, and two people died. There's a lot going on with it this week. Last time we checked in with Ron, we had secured a jury. I want to know what else has happened though, Ron.
Well, yesterday, Friday, the 19th, we picked our alternates and then we gave opening statements in the case. And the prosecution started with their first couple of witnesses. One was the dispatcher who took a 911 call to
Mm,
document the time of the accident. And now they have the main investigating officer, a guy named Christopher Watson, a CHP officer, who did all the initial investigation, including interviewed Jacob, um, who also assessed him as being under the influence of CNS depressant, Xanax, and marijuana.
mm. This seems like when like past the jury selection part of it, once you start with the opening statements, there's a certain level of I don't know a tone of drama in the room. Is that right?
Definitely attention. The courtroom's packed. On one side of the courtroom are friends or family members of the victims, including the mother of the child that died, and also she's the same person as the daughter of the grandmother who died. And she has quite a few supporters with her. I don't know who they all are, but I know they support her, which is she deserves it. I mean, she suffered a horrible loss. It's an unspeakable tragedy. And the other side of the courtroom are Jacob's family and friends, and it's packed on that side. And uh, everybody's being very respectful. Everybody kind of understands what the case is about. There's nobody's been inappropriate, but the tension is thick. And so, the DA got up to give her opening statement. Of course, she's playing videos of Jacob taking massive amounts of Xanax and drinking and smoking weed and portraying exactly what happened. Honestly, that's what he did. And she's asking for a conviction for murder too. And then my opening
When you say
statement,
murder two, you're talking about second degree murder, right?
yes,
Okay.
second degree murder requires what they call implied malice, which requires him knowingly disregarding human life.
Mm,
Uh, and so our defense is basically number one, uh, saying he takes full responsibility for what he did. He's not denying anything, and we're trying the case as not denying anything. For instance, I haven't even made an objection.
mm,
There's been tons of them I could have made, but I'm not making any because I'm making it clear we're not denying anything. We're only fighting one particular thing. And in my opening statement, I made that clear, and then I also made clear that look, what teaches us about what we can do and what we can't do is our experiences.
mm.
It's like when a kid touches a hot stove, he gets burned, he stops. If that stove is not hot when he touches it, he'll keep touching it until he gets burned. Well, Jacob was driving around high on Xanax, massive amounts of Xanax, for almost a year.
Mm.
At one point, he got pulled over by Las Vegas PD, and he was on Xanax speeding, and the officer gave him a warning and let him go.
Didn't notice, in other words.
Not one bit.
So there seems to be like partly a theory of the case that this kid was just sort of he wasn't a kid, he was 20 years old, but that he was sort of he was in a mindset of doing drugs all the time and was sort of like functional about it. You showed me some videos where he's going around picking up food for his friends, like getting pulled over and a cop not noticing. So it seems like there is some argument to be made that this guy had written this kind of behavior into his everyday life somehow.
It was his everyday life. And here's the thing: when they tested his blood that day of the accident, it was probably about 4 hours, 5 hours after the accident. The blood came back with such a high level of Xanax that it was above the lethal limit, meaning that they couldn't even tell you how much Xanax in his body because
Mm.
it was so high. And the toxicologist who did the examination said they had never tested this level of Xanax in anybody who was alive.
So he just had like an extraordinary level of tolerance, it sounds like, for this drug.
Right. And that's what I told the jury, exactly that. And then I said, there's only one way to obtain a tolerance like this. And that's because you've been doing it for a long period of time and taking massive quantities of drugs. If you and I took a Xanax, one pill right now, I'm assuming, David, that you're not a Xanax user, uh,
It's a wise assumption. Yeah.
it would have a serious effect on us right away. We'd be drowsy, we'd be
Right.
lethargic, the whole thing. If we took 10 Xanax, we'd be dead or we'd be non functional. Okay? This guy took over 50 Xanax pills. Okay, an unbelievable dosage would literally kill an elephant for most people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would have killed either one of us, no doubt.
Right.
And was able to do all kinds of things: drive, talk, react. When the thing I thought was interesting, and people introduced this yesterday, was his initial interview with the police officer after the accident. Now, he's responding to questions. He's not saying, he's being very responsive to questions. He's answering them appropriately in terms of, they may not be accurate in terms of when he was asked, hey, did you use pills today? But they are pretty freaking coherent when he says, no, I haven't, because he's making a denial.
Is there body cam footage of this?
There's audio footage. The body cam footage is from the car. It's not body cam. It's the video on the car.
Right.
And the officer, because he had to block the street and park his car horizontally, and they're standing, to be safe, they're standing on the other side of the car where the camera's facing a field.
Mm.
So you see people walking around and other cars passing, but you can hear them, but you can't see them.
Do you think the officer on the night of the accident suspected intoxication?
100%, because he's a sophisticated guy.
Right.
And he's what they call a drug recognition expert also. And he immediately noticed that, he had indications that, yeah, something's going on here. It's more than that. And also, he knew the accident by the debris field was because the car drifted off into the wrong lane and hit the people on the motorcycle. And you don't really drift off that far off your mark unless, you're under the influence of something.
Do we know the physical symptoms that he was showing? Was he like slurring his words? Was he stumbling around? Because I'm imagining a guy on that much is just like, oh, he's incapacitated. But it sounds like he was actually able to coherently answer questions and things like that.
I think the officer's suspicion was that it was weed. He didn't realize it was Xanax. He accounted for it eventually when he did a more detailed investigation, but initially I think he was thinking it's marijuana. Um, he was suspicious right away. The police officer said he was slurring his words and was stuttering or whatever. But when you listen to the audio recording, that's not what you hear. Okay. Now, he maybe have a more trained ear than I do, but I'm listening, and I've heard lots of people talk, and he sounds fine. Mm. Now, you could say he's slow to respond, but you could also say, if you're smart, you're thinking through your answers before you talk to a cop. Mm. And then, when you ask Jacob, why the hell did you take the field sobriety test? He goes, I actually thought I'd do fine on him because I felt fine. Because in his head.
The tolerance was so much.
Right. And I asked him.
I think that's how people die from drugs, though, really, because they're just like they're just taking so much that they have such an intolerance that they eventually do get to that point that would kill a person. But
right.
God, it's intense.
And then the other thing about it is Jacob has very little memory of that day. The first time when he saw the video of the accidents and everything like that, he started crying because you could see the bodies on the roadway. Mm. And he realized, he thought he hit one guy. He didn't realize there were two.
Pedestrians or people in another car?
No, he thought it was a motorcycle. His version of events was that he thought the motorcycle was coming towards him, and he swerved to avert it, and they swerved with him. And that's how he hit him. Yeah. That's not what happened. Yeah. I mean, he was in the other lane. He was either wrong or not telling the truth. But he actually thought it was just an accident. He wasn't going to get in any trouble. Mm. Like, I asked him, I go, why are you doing all this? Weren't you scared? And he goes, no, I just figured it was an accident. They're eventually going to let me go when they realize it.
Wow. Okay. So 4 years later, we're in the middle of this trial. How much longer do you expect it to go? I mean, are there a lot of witnesses to be called? And I'm curious about what witnesses you're calling, Ron.
Okay. Well, first, my strategy has been not to contest anything. And so I've stipulated to 5 witnesses who don't have to be called. I typically won't stipulate to shit because I want them to prove everything. Mm. But the only way my defense works is if the jury understands we're taking full responsibility. We're not trying to do some creative defense. We're just saying it's not murder. That's what we're saying. Mm. And it would really help our defense if the DA bites and asks for the gross vehicular manslaughter instruction, right, which I'm trying to get her to do.
What's the over under on the chances of that?
Say 60-40. She panics and asks for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because it's hard for somebody with her little experience, to literally have the wherewithal, we'll say, or the confidence that she can go all or nothing. Because if it's nothing for her, she probably will never prosecute a murder case again. Well, I won't say never. It'll be a long time before she prosecutes a murder case again. But so she'll have to have some serious cojones to hang in there and not ask for that instruction, because she knows her worst case in that situation would be that he'd get 22 years. But is she willing to go for 30 years to life to 0?
Right. Well, that's the gamble, and I'm that angle on it. This sort of like, I mean, even the careerist angle on it, right? That a young prosecutor is looking for wins, right? That part of it is fascinating to me because it's built into the pressure of the trial, and it's built into sort of her figuring out what charges to bring in this case.
Right. And my way I read people is the first thing I think is what's in their what's in their self-interest. Like I always go by whatever person I try to figure out what people's self-interest in, then you can predict behavior.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. There's like 8 different forces at work in the courtroom here, beyond just like the case. There are people who are have a number of different pressures on them, I guess.
Yeah, and one of them is definitely her self-interest in her career. And now, what can mitigate that self-interest would be a supervisor who won't let her do it. Mm. And that's what I can't account for. I can only account for her.
Right.
So if her supervisor says, no, we're going all or nothing, we'll go to the mattresses with this one. But then I also think the DA's office in Ventura has lost some very high-profile cases. We talked about one on our podcast, the murder case with the marijuana-induced psychosis.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a huge loss, and they could have taken a lesser charge, and they didn't. And they went all in, and they got hammered. So, and there's another case that happened where they could have taken a voluntary, they didn't, and they got hammered.
What happens really though? Like when a DA, because you hear that all the time, and it makes sense to me. Obviously, DA's office is taking losses. They're charging people with murder, and they're losing those cases. Why don't they want that to happen? Like, what is the consequence of that for them?
One, it's bad publicity. First of all, you understand in serious cases, the DA should never lose. Should just never lose. I mean, you have more resources. You're in court because you can prove it. If you can't prove it, you shouldn't be in court. Okay, so you should really never lose. And when I was trying serious cases, I never lost.
You have reminded us of that many times. Well, because 100% record for Ron Bamieh as DA.
On serious cases, 100% all the time. Now, if you're going to lose a chicken chip misdemeanor, that's easy to do. But you're never going to lose. You should never lose a serious case because the reality of those serious cases is that the resource advantage is overwhelming in favor of the prosecution. And they're the one choosing to be in court, not us. So when you do lose those cases in the DA's office, the supervisor of that unit gets stung, the prosecutor of that unit gets stung.
Well, I mean, I think I told you I went and saw a case where the DA brought out his evidence, and he was like, "Here, we're prosecuting this case for this robbery," and he brought out a couple things, and I was like, after his opening statement, I was like, "That's it? That's all you got?" And it kind of surprised me. I was like, I thought the DAs really go after cases where it's like an open and shut. Here it is, but this was just kind of like, yeah, we have the guy's phone. He was in the area. Vote guilty. And it was kind of like, I was surprised by how weak the case seemed. And by the way, that jury did hang in that case.
The loss. Yeah. And they're going to try it again, probably.
Yeah.
But so in this case, my strategy from the beginning was try to hopefully bait her into asking for the gross vehicular manslaughter, and also to convince a jury that if you let him go on this one, there's other consequences out there.
I'm very interested to see how this turns out. Do you think you'll have it to the jury next week?
I think she's going to be done with her case on Wednesday. She told me that. It'll take me a day and a half to put in my entire case, which is going to be a couple family members of Jacob, Jacob who'll testify, and then a mental health expert who'll testify.
You're having Jacob testify.
100%. Yeah.
What's behind that decision? Because I feel like there are a lot of defense attorneys don't want their client to testify. I don't know if that's a right assumption, if that's from movies or not. But why are you having Jacob testify?
Well, in 99% of my cases, I wouldn't have my client testify. But the way it works, there's a couple cases where you really need your client to testify. One would be self-defense, because there's no way for a jury to understand he had a reasonable fear of great bodily danger or death without him saying that. Okay, you just can't. The second part of that case is when the odds are really bad against you and that you're trying to get a theory across that's on a couple of elements. Mm-hmm. And so in order to make this work, I need to put the history of Jacob into evidence. And there's no way to put the history of Jacob into evidence without him testifying. There's just no way to do it. So if he doesn't testify about being addicted for a year plus, if he doesn't testify about his depression, if he doesn't testify as to his experiences where he drove repeatedly under the influence of narcotics and nobody got hurt, right, and he felt completely safe doing it, he'll even say he had the belief, mistaken, but he had the belief that he was a better driver high than he was sober.
So, in other words, this case is deeply about mindset, and in order to get that mindset to the jury, you have to have the guy testify.
The jury literally has to find that in Jacob's mind at the time he was driving when the accident occurred, that he understood that his actions could cause death, that he knowingly disregarded people's life, that he thought that when he was driving. And he's driving the car, hey, I could kill somebody. I could kill somebody. I could kill somebody. That's what they got to find. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to say is he's driving going, shit, this is fucking a nice drive. Yeah. Hey, how's everybody doing out there? I'm fine. I'm cool. Right. I'll be home tonight, get some sleep, get high tomorrow.
Oof, I will be very interested to hear how the jury reacts to all of this information and Jacob's testimony next week.
Yeah.
Catch up with you again, Ron. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The scary part for us is that the act is abysmal.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely abysmal, and
it's not a fun case. It's not a fun case at all. But I think one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it on the podcast and do these segments with you as the trial is happening is because it's a really, I think it sets up a few key ideas in the idea of like what we're doing in criminal defense and how cases are prosecuted. And when it's not just like a question of did he do it or not, it comes down to some real subtleties to understand how this stuff works. So thank you, Ron. I always appreciate talking with you.
Yeah, thank you, and we'll see. It's going to be an exciting conclusion. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see you next week.
Okay.